The man possesses a divine bow, yet his arrows lack heads. Despite this, they exert immense power, capable of altering landscapes and saving countless civilian lives. Now he is being kicked around by a boy. Although Mele is unhappy about being disturbed during his nap, he is not angry. The boy's intent is simple. He has heard that Mele will attend a martial arts tournament in Oriatia, a place already filled with formidable competitors. The boy doubts Mele's success, but Mele argues like a child, believing in his strength. Victory would earn him a wealth of gold coins, allowing him to repair the damaged houses in his village. Since the Demon King's defeat, the world still faces many threats. To find a hero who can bring peace, Oriatia has organized this tournament. As the boy is about to speak again, Mele foresees a storm coming and tells him to go home. Soon, a torrential rain begins, threatening to flood the village. Mele draws his bow and redirects the flood. After completing his task, Mele finally rests. When he wakes, he sees the boy again. His friend Elie is nearing death and wishes to see Mele one last time, to stand on his shoulders and look at the stars. Mele not only obliges, but also lifts her friends into the sky, creating a moment of happiness, though it turns out to be just a dream. The boy learns from his father that the villagers requested Mele's participation in the contest, for he had never left to ensure their safety, despite giants typically loving to travel. 8 years ago, the village nearly fell to the Demon King's army. It was Mele who stood on the hill daily, deterring the army. Although he never fired an arrow, his formidable presence alone scared them off. The boy now realizes Mele's strength is substantial. The meteors in the sky are actually Mele's arrows aimed at the stars. While he misses by a small margin each time, he believes he will succeed one day, given his ability to see beyond the horizon and his mastery of archery. In Togi City, Kuro's expression is grave. Despite the crowds nearby, he realizes he is being targeted by the Old Kingdom's forces. Kune, his flying scout, detects 13 trackers, but Kuro senses there are 14, with 5 hidden deeper. He activates his abilities and stealthily eliminates the trackers. Afterward, Kune returns to Kuro's clothing, and though the trackers fail to spot him, Kuro remains cautious even in the alleys, aware that his all-seeing eyes are weakening, possibly becoming as ordinary as anyone else's. At the alley's end, a carriage awaits, with Oriacha's 17th general, arriving to invite Kuro to the martial arts tournament in Oriacha. After inspecting, Kuro finds something unusual on the carriage's roof and doubts why a general from Oriacha would personally fetch him. Elea explains that this demonstrates his worth, knowing they cannot avoid all checkpoints along the way, hence the precaution for safety. Once they leave the city successfully, Kuro knows the danger isn't over as they enter Worm's territory. Ready for battle and expecting Worm's attack, a figure appears from above the carriage. Surprisingly, this person, known as Willow Sword Sujuru, also knows of another weak spot in Worm's heart. Oriatia needs strong warriors like Sujuru and strategic minds like Kuro. Kuro realizes Oriachia's determination in selecting the sole hero, consolidating all hostile forces and using the Queen's name to remove any disturbances as proof. Upon Kuro's arrival in Oriatia, only 38 days remain until the calamity. Today, Shirok was assigned to conduct a census in the surrounding area and stumbled upon a manor in the mountains. In the courtyard, a young girl named Lenaris was trimming plants. Noticing that Shirok seemed injured, she invited him inside to bandage his wound, feeling responsible since it might have been caused by her roses. Inside, Shirok found the room dimly lit. After a quick bandaging, Lenaris went to prepare tea since there were no servants around, only her and her father living there. Learning that Shirok had returned after the real Demon King was defeated, Lenaris felt a kinship. Having lost much due to the same Demon King, now only left with the house and her father. Curious, Shirok asked about her father and was surprised to learn he was Reinhardt, the former leader of the espionage organization Obsidian Eyes. Captivated by Lenaris, Shirok paid no heed to this revelation. When Lenaris learned that nobles were compiling a register, she asked Shirok for a favor to deliver a letter to them on her behalf. Inquiring about the possibility of meeting again, Lenaris assured him it was possible and expressed how lonely it was living alone as a woman. Shirok delivered a letter to Ariasha's 13th General Inu, who could discern Lenaris' background from the writing. However, the letter contained only a blank sheet. Yet Inu knew Shirok was not lying, as the Obsidian Eyes had long been exterminated. Suddenly, Inu mentioned otherworldly visitors, who brought vast knowledge, including epidemiology, revealing that diseases are caused by tiny, invisible organisms linked to vampire traits. It was rumored that Obsidian Eyes Rehart was a vampire, whose true nature involved pathogens in the blood, spreading diseases through wounds and mucous membranes, turning the infected into obedient slaves. Shirok refused to believe this, but Inu had already checked his blood and confirmed his infection, making him a slave to his progenitor, forced to obey commands. Shirok couldn't believe Lenaris would deceive him, and while Inu wasn't sure, both Rehart and Lenaris were seen as threats to humanity. Leading the way, Shirok guided a large force to annihilate Obsidian Eyes, turning the manor into a blaze before his eyes. Still, he thought of Lenaris. Later, soldiers found 2 charred bodies in the room. To comfort Shirok, Inu remarked that love is most beautiful at the start, but seldom lasts. Suddenly, the guard at the gate died. Inu, sensing an attack, sought cover, but was still struck by a thrown knife in the thigh. Shirok, realizing Lenaris was alive, shouted for her to come out. Soon, Lenaris appeared, pushing Rehart from the darkness, disappointed that Shirok had led an assault on her. Knowing they were both vampires, Inu quickly ordered them to be shot. Subsequently, all soldiers began to attack each other, as Lenaris had taken control of everyone. Inu was in disbelief, as there had been no physical contact. He soon realized that Lenaris' virus could be transmitted through the air. Quickly, all his soldiers were killed. Shirok thought Lenaris was the true leader of Obsidian Eyes, but she denied it, unwilling to misuse her father's revered name. Obsidian Eyes was always her father's organization. As they saw, Obsidian Eyes still existed. Lenaris hoped Inu would recommend them for the Royal Martial Arts Tournament, intending to create another era of turmoil for Rehart. Even though Inu firmly refused, the outcome had been predetermined from the start, and Shirok had been used by Lenaris all along. It was assumed that with the terrifying Teroa dead, his many magic swords would become ownerless. However, some doubted whether Teroa was truly dead. Eljeet, not wanting to affect morale, executed a man on the spot for raising this question. He believed the era of superstitions and legends was over. Yet the belief that any possessor of a magic sword would surely die was deeply ingrained in people's minds. Anyone who knew the whereabouts of a magic sword would face the arrival of the death-bringing Teroa, as he existed even before the real Demon King and was an unshakable natural law. Unexpectedly, 4 scouts Eljeet had sent out failed to return. Suddenly, one scout appeared and collapsed with a horrific wound on his back. The panicked crowd thought Teroa had appeared, but Eljeet believed the magic sword had been stolen by other thieves, as screams continued to sound around them. 4 years earlier, Teroa judged that his son, Yakon, lacked the ability to wield a magic sword due to his overly kind nature, which interfered with the sword's sinister will. Yakon suggested discarding the sword's will, puzzled whether he really didn't have to inherit his father's role as a sword-bearer. Teroa planned to end that legacy with himself, but Yakon worried that people would still fight over the sword and thought it better to make it disappear. Initially, Teroa agreed, but now saw this idea as naive. Conflicts would arise among people, even without the magic sword. Yakon argued that it was precisely because the sword was not used that no war had occurred. That day, Teroa noticed an enemy in the sky. Treasure hunter Alice had come for the magic sword. Teroa did not expect Alus to see through all his attack moves. He decided to gamble his life, which he deemed worthless. As Teroa relentlessly pursued him, Alus pulled out a flame magic item that had destroyed a duchy in the first season and continued to attack from a distance. However, all his attacks were blocked by Teroa's magic sword. Teroa realized that he couldn't kill Alus with just the scythe in his hand, and his secret weapon was the nearby luminous blade. Ultimately, Teroa was a step too slow. After achieving his goal, Alus immediately left. However, Yakon witnessed everything. To avenge his father's death and retrieve the magic sword, Yakun decided to inherit his father's mantle and all that came with it. 4 years later, Yakun had become the fearsome Teroa, and what followed was his magic sword showcase. At the same time, Kiyazuna, who proclaimed himself as a demon king, created a combat golem capable of infinite strengthening. Besides possessing the fundamental attribute of indestructibility, its mastery over magic reached divine levels. Kiyazuna equipped such a powerful system with 4 settings, providing him the means to stand at the pinnacle of the world. This turn of events left another self-proclaimed demon king, Melusi, regretting his decision to challenge Kiyazuna's golem. Melusi's own creation became merely a stepping stone for others. Initially, Melusi's golem had the upper hand, though Kiyazuna's golem, Mestelexel, demonstrated overwhelming power in one-on-one combat. However, it struggled against the combined assault of Melusi's 2 golems. Just when Melusi thought the battle was over, Kiyazuna remained unfazed, merely complaining that the bird golem's laser was a copy of his design. Melusi admitted to the imitation, but claimed to have made significant improvements and declared the victory as his own. Kiyazuna scoffed, saying it was too early to determine a winner. At that moment, Mestelexel began to chant a life spell. Seeing this, the centipede and bird golems immediately attacked, but their previously effective attacks now did nothing. This is due to the basic regenerative magic that Kiyazuna endowed Mestelexel with, and the first attribute learned from death. Melusi deduced that the ability to revive was due to the core, so the bird golem shattered Mestelexel's shell to seize and destroy the core. Unbeknownst to him, this triggered the second attribute Kiyazuna had installed. The core also possessed regenerative capabilities similar to the shell. This revelation shocked Melusi. Despite both the core and shell of Mestelexel having regenerative properties, Melusi devised a new strategy, causing the centipede golem to explode, blasting Mestelexel into the sea. This would put both the internal and external life forms of Mestelexel at risk, as even the regeneration magic would lead to continuous cycles of death due to the environment. However, Melusi was unaware that Mestelexel's mastery of magic was at its peak. Seeing this, Melusi lost the will to continue fighting. However, Kiyazuna had no intention of stopping there, as Mestelexel had other attributes yet to be revealed. Mestelexel's abilities transcend the norms of this world because he was created using a visitor from another world as material, and that visitor is a scholar. The combination of technology and magic created a miraculous chemical reaction, resulting in a multitude of technologies and magic not found in this world. Furthermore, Mestelexel's 4th attribute was the most exaggerated. Its core and shell could not be killed simultaneously. This meant that it was indestructible by any means. Oriachia planned to eliminate the calamity known as particle storm and used a large workforce to evacuate the entire town's residents. However, their motivation was not the safety of the civilians, but because their trump card could not be seen easily. It's common for spies to hide in such places. Recently joined, Kuro became the eyes of Oriachia. However, his all-seeing eyes gradually degenerated to those of a normal person. Oriachia recruited Kuro specifically to eliminate particle storm. Therefore, Kuro wanted Kune to escape, feeling a bad omen about the battle. Kune, however, refused to leave, as she couldn't live on if Kuro died, so she chose to stay. Meanwhile, as the notorious disaster, wherever particle storm went, destruction followed. Unbeknownst to them, someone was chasing particle storm. The golem Mestelexel, playing with a stolen explosive sword, was the strongest non-living entity created by Kiyazuna. It possessed immortality. Whether against magic swords or anything else, as a victor, it had the right to take. Even if the opponent was particle storm, it made no difference. At that moment, Mestelexel located the airflow of particle storm, confirming Kiyazuna's calculations that it was nearby. This proved her war machine was capable of catching up with particle storm. Kiyazuna pursued particle storm because it had destroyed her country and killed her family members. Whenever a nation began to prosper, particle storm would destroy it. Just then, they were suddenly attacked. It turned out that Teroa, in search of the explosive sword, had found them. Meanwhile, Kuro was watching from a distance, witnessing Kiyazuna and the Golem fighting an unidentified swordsman wielding a magic sword. Kune speculated that the attacker was the deceased Teroa. However, Kuro did not believe that a dead monster could revive, and he could even hear the swordsman's heartbeat. Teroa wielded a poison sword, whose touch instantly crystallized and eroded life, even in golems. Kiyazuna recognized the poison sword's properties and had Mestalexil sever the infected arm. Teroa was unaware of Mestalexil's core location, but it didn't matter much to him. His plan was simply to chop it into pieces. Unexpectedly, Mestalexil asked Teroa if he was also created by his mother, noting his strength. Teroa demanded the magic sword, but Mestalexil smashed the poisoned arm towards him, intending to transfer the poison. Although Teroa didn't understand the underlying principle, the high temperature caused the incoming missile to veer off course. Mestalexil took the opportunity to chant life arts, restoring its body. Teroa realized this was no ordinary golem. It not only saw through his skills and speed, but also reacted promptly. Unbeknownst to them, during their fight, Particle Storm was rapidly approaching. Teroa saw that Kiyazuna was pursuing Particle Storm and thought their meeting might not be coincidental. Unfortunately, it was too late for communication. Kiyazuna greeted Particle Storm. It had been 18 years since their last encounter. However, facing the onslaught of Particle Storm, Teroa and Kiyazuna were still preoccupied with battling each other. Under the dual assault of Teroa's flame sword and wind sword, even Kiyazuna's proudest golem couldn't withstand. Seeing Teroa pressuring Kiyazuna to hand over the explosive sword, Mestalexil struggled to resist, but using powerful weapons at such close range could harm Kiyazuna. Teroa doesn't understand why she should lose her life for the magic sword. However, Kiyazuna declares that she will not submit to anyone. As Particle Storm drew closer behind them, Teroa was forced to use his wind sword to block it. Meanwhile, Mestalexil kept harassing Teroa. Although Mestalexil could use neurotoxins and other powerful weapons against Particle Storm, it hesitated to use them for fear of affecting Kiyazuna. Unbeknownst to them, Teroa had already begun to erode Mestalexil with his poison sword, and soon the war machine would fall apart. Teroa promised that if the explosive sword was handed over, he would deal with Particle Storm himself. He could use the wind sword to slice through the storm, no matter how tough the armor at the storm's core. With the explosive sword, he could kill it. Suddenly, a burst of flame streaked across the sky, hitting the area with a red-hot iron stake. From afar, the giant Mele was aiming there, using coordinates relayed by Kuro at the front line. Mele only needed to hit the target exactly to complete his mission. Unfortunately, the first shot missed due to incorrect coordinates provided by Kuro. Each of Mele's shots required Oriacha to meet his demands. However, Kuro's eyes had already weakened, and from such a distance, he couldn't accurately predict the coordinates. Kuro forcibly activated his abilities and issued coordinates again, but still missed Particle Storm. Instead, Mestalexil used craft arts to restore its body. Meanwhile, Teroa had already seized the explosive sword and promised to kill Particle Storm, as agreed. The true form of Particle Storm was actually an ancient worm. As another giant arrow fell, both Teroa and the worm felt discomfort. The so-called Particle Storm was merely layered spatial armor, impervious to ordinary attacks. Therefore, Kiyazuna invented a directional energy weapon, which Particle Storm couldn't block due to the microwave's ability to induce heating of subcutaneous tissue. However, Particle Storm was a coward. When overpowered, it burrowed underground. On the other hand, Kuro's body was failing, but he refused to heed Kune's advice to flee and did not want her to deny his vision. In fact, his eyes had not been weakening. The reason he had been giving incorrect coordinates was that Kuro's subconscious believed he could not see. Kuro knew that once the operation succeeded, Oriacha would immediately dispose of him as he would be of no use. Thus, his eyes subconsciously chose not to see because failure was actually the best outcome. Yet, he harbored a foolish wish not to see anyone die. Now, with clarity of thought, Kuro decided to use his insightful eye one last time to help protect the people from Particle Storm, providing a correct set of coordinates. However, the Oriacha leadership truly lacked humanity. Kune had no choice but to seek help from Kiyazuna and Teroa, pointing out that there was an Oriacha position ahead. Kuro was in a near-death state, trying to save everyone. Teroa immediately realized it was the observer. Someone had been secretly watching him during the fight, and Kuro's efforts had been crucial in killing the worm, earning him the right to be rescued. However, Teroa feared that if they delayed, Kuro would die from excessive blood loss. Thus, Teroa was willing to exchange the explosive sword for Kiyozuna's war machine. Meanwhile, Mestalexel wanted to leave the magic sword where it was, feeling that since it hadn't defeated Teroa this time, it would come back for it after winning a future battle. Kiyozuna was pleased that it had found a rival it wanted to defeat. Afterwards, Kuro was successfully rescued. He was puzzled why Kune would go to such lengths for him, not realizing that Kune had fallen for him. Kune hoped Kuro would smile more, and Kuro was happy that it was because of Kune he could smile. However, unknown to them, their great battle had been captured by Lenaris. Not only was the explosive sword reclaimed by Obsidian Eyes and returned to the Old Kingdom, but the information about participants related to the Ariatia Martial Contest was also secured by them. Particle Storm was puzzled why it hadn't died yet, only for Lenaris to unexpectedly speak its true name. No one knew why it had gone to Ariatia, and this would remain a secret. Particle Storm was also infected with a virus by Lenaris and ordered to commit suicide. Since Particle Storm was defeated, the Old Kingdom's rebellion also completely collapsed. General Gilnis became a prisoner. However, Ariasia planned to have him duel Roskle fairly. Gilnis couldn't help but mock himself, noting that the knight, resembling a hero, was well suited to suppress a rebel like him. Yet, many Ariatia residents still supported Gilnis, prompting Ariatia to give him a chance to gamble with his life. They decided to release him until the day of the duel. The third general was not worried about him causing trouble outside. It would just give them a reason to punish him earlier for rejecting the queen's mercy. At this, Gilnis became hysterical, declaring the queen merely a usurper who seized the kingdom, which rightfully belonged to the late King. It was the King's willingness to accept all races that laid the foundation of today's Ariatia. Seeing his anger, the third general suggested he should win the duel before making claims. Meanwhile, his subordinates were ready to act. The duel between Gilnis and Roskle was already the talk of the capital, scheduled to take place in 2.5 months. Ironically, the shopkeeper supported Gilnis, while his young son admired Roskle. Unbeknownst to the guards, someone had switched Gilnis's weapon. The moment Gilnis held it, he recognized it as the explosive sword taken by Lenaris. Soon, the monitoring guards were knocked unconscious by teacher Ramzo. Among the 7 heroes who first fought the real Demon King, only Neft and Ramzo survived the final battle. Gilnis disclosed his plan. He would have his men shoot arrows from the spectator stands on the day of the duel. Therefore, he hoped Ramzo would provide protection and cast a buff on him on the day of the duel. After all, Roskle was strong, and Gilnis was not confident of an easy victory. On the day of the duel, the stands were filled with Roskle's supporters. Both duelists hoped for a spectacular and fair match. Just moments ago, Gilnis received a buff from Ramzo, a point-pressing technique that allows one to surpass their physical limits, fully controlling their strength and speed. Therefore, at the very first clash, Roskle's weapon was destroyed by the explosive sword. Unexpectedly, Roskle was able to instantly counterattack using word arts without chanting. Gilnis couldn't believe it. How could one person simultaneously activate different word arts? As he attempted to retaliate, his body was paralyzed again by word arts. Roskle had figured out the activation condition for the explosive sword. It needed to contact the target with the speed of a slashing strike to detonate. Gilnis forcibly broke free from the restraint and, as a signal, removed equipment from his arm, cueing his hidden allies to shoot arrows at him. This would make the audience believe Roskle was resorting to foul play. His accomplices could then use this as a trigger to incite a riot in the stands. However, what he did not anticipate was the delay in his allies' action. Roskle outwardly agreed to accept Gilnis's surrender, but deliberately revealed a hidden remote casting device to him. Gilnis finally saw the true face of the pseudo-hero. However, Gilnis could never have guessed that Ramzo was also Roskle's man. The reason his allies didn't shoot arrows was that Ramzo had controlled them. Even the buff he received was at Roskle's request. Ramzo didn't understand why he should make an enemy stronger, But Rosclay knew very well that no one at the upcoming martial contest would be weaker than him, so he wanted to gain experience fighting stronger opponents, knowing that such minor details could be life or death. Meanwhile, Kayazuna had agreed to let Mestalexel become a candidate hero and go to Oriatia. After parting with Kuro, Teroa encountered Oriatia's 22nd general, who immediately noticed the absence of the luminous blade on Teroa, confirming the rumors that Alus had taken it. The general asked Teroa if he wanted to participate in the royal tournament, offering to recommend him for a chance to fight Alus. Teroa, known as a magic sword slayer, could not understand why he was being invited to compete. However, to the 22nd general, it was more interesting this way, as the legend of someone resurrected from hell was quite impressive. Yet this reason did not convince Teroa. Seeing this, the 22nd general did not insist, but he promised that Teroa could approach him any time if he changed his mind, as he had already decided that Teroa was the best nominee. Meanwhile, the 3rd general is meeting with Rosclay. Mele is unaware that he is being used, convinced to act by the lie that a particle storm will soon pass through his village. This was merely to gauge Mele's combat strength in advance. However, the 3rd general has realized that others are also trying to gather information about the martial contest's candidates. It is known that the other party is a gray-haired young man currently affiliated with the Free Cities. It is recognized as the strongest entity on the surface, possessing non-human powers that can change the terrain and climate, as well as a deadly dragon breath that can instantly kill all living beings. However, because of its immense strength, heroes from various races challenged it for fame, but all invariably met their deaths on the spot. Disappointed, it retreated to live alone in the deep mountains. Yet, even such a formidable being still tempts some to aspire to be dragon slayers. Inspired by Rosclay's renowned fame, the man before him was filled with the courage to challenge Luknoka. However, the 6th general had no intention of fighting, nor did he believe Lagrex could win. But Lagrex was confident. In reality, the 6th general aimed to defeat Alus, believing that once Alus entered the royal duel, only Luknoka, a dragon from the strongest terrestrial lineage, could defeat him. 300 years ago, this was a tropical area, completely transformed by Luknoka's presence. The 6th general asked Lagrex how he planned to deal with Luknoka's claws. Lagrex responded that quick movements would suffice. Facing Luknoka's dragon breath, he planned to withstand it with sheer presence. Suddenly, the 6th general felt he had become weaker. Since his defeat by Vikion and witnessing Kurt's death, he seemed to have given up on himself. Unbeknownst to him, Luknoka had already appeared. Faced with Lagrex, who sought fame through him, Luknoka stated he could offer no hospitality. The 6th general sensed that the opponent did not intend to fight, but avoiding the battle would brand him forever as a coward. However, Luknoka was indifferent. It only wanted to know about the outside world now. Lagrex attacked with his sword, but was knocked away in a single encounter. Yet, Lagrex did not accept the outcome, believing in his ability to defeat a real dragon, especially after hearing of Rosclay's heroic deeds, which gave his life new meaning. However, as a colleague of Rosclay, the 6th general knew the truth about Rosclay. Beneath the heroic facade was hypocrisy. Since only becoming a dragon slayer could bring Lagrex peace, Luknoka agreed to give him a chance. At this moment, the 6th general finally understood what Luknoka feared. It was disillusioned with the outside world. Many heroes had sought to gain fame by using its corpse, but they all ended up being killed by Luknoka. Even though it had given them chances, none were willing to back down. The 6th general informed Luknoka that Oriatia now gathered heroes from across the world. In the ancient labyrinths that existed since time immemorial, 12 had already been conquered by a wyvern named Alus. Even Teroa had fallen to Alus, who had then taken the luminous blade and later used it to slay Vikaon. Grateful for the information provided, Luknoka spared their lives and decided to go to Oriatia to see if Alus was truly as strong as claimed. Meanwhile, in another desert, a man mentioned that someone had brought out 7 books from the sand maze and used the knowledge within to become a noble. The books in the maze are said to be worth a nation. However, the lichens in the desert prevent humans from exploring, necessitating the organization of armed trade caravans. These groups have now become targets for the lichens. The armed group was soon annihilated by Heng, who is so powerful because all desert lichens are disciples of the original hero, Neft. But upon their return, they found their clan had been attacked. Their companions indicated the attackers were not ordinary creatures, but came from the sand maze. At that moment, Canute spotted an ooze on the roof, claiming to be Phayanop. Heng attempted to strike, but the next moment Phayanop's attack instantly knocked him down, having seen through Heng's moves. Neft, who had been living in seclusion, had to appear in person to meet an old acquaintance he hadn't seen in 21 years. The visitor's purpose was simple: to duel with Neft. Phayanop believed Neft's aging powers posed no threat, yet Neft could temporarily regain his peak using word arts. Neft was surprised by the move he had never seen before, a skill Phayanop had learned in the sand maze. Phayanop wanted to prove it was stronger than Neft and questioned why Neft had abandoned it back then. Neft's answer was the same as before, because its power could never match that of the true Demon King. However, Phayanop lacked self-awareness, both in the past and now, confident it could defeat the true Demon King. Now, Phayanop had fulfilled its promise, claiming its power would eventually surpass them all. Unfortunately, the true Demon King was no longer around, a regret Phayanop could never erase. Neft then suggested it go to Ariatia, where a mysterious hero claimed to have defeated the true Demon King and was expected to attend the Royal Martial Contest. If Phayanop believed it could defeat the true Demon King, it should go to Ariatia and prove itself by defeating the one who overcame the Demon King. Anyone who has seen ogres knows that their cannibalism is a natural law of this world. Priestess Kunodi witnessed an ogre during her childhood and was surprised when traces of ogres appeared near her village again. As one of the most powerful man-eating creatures among the demons, Kunode agreed to join the villagers in hunting it down. The next day, they found ogre tracks, but Kunode doubted whether this was a man-eating ogre. She took a risk and approached the ogre, but did not smell any blood. Moreover, the creature did not eat the rabbit behind it, but only the wild fruits in its hands. She greeted the ogre, but it only sniffed her scent, as this ogre was unable to speak. Kunode wondered how it managed to live alone with such a language barrier. Eventually, Kunode decided to save this ogress. During its month of appearance, no attacks occurred in the village. Although she knew convincing everyone to trust a language-impaired, defenseless man-eating ogress was difficult, as a priestess, she wanted to follow her deeply held beliefs and extend a helping hand to every troubled soul. The villagers agreed to shelter the ogress, but it was more of a disguised surveillance. Kunode didn't understand why the ogress's hearing seemed normal, yet it couldn't understand human language, as if it had never been endowed with language. Therefore, Kunode decided to name him Uhak the Silent and teach him word arts. The essence of the power of word arts lies not in the words spoken, but in connecting the heart with the word arts. She believed that one day, Uhak would be accepted by the villagers. In the days that followed, Uhak became a priest, sincerely helping the villagers with their troubles. Under Kunode's guidance, he learned the scriptures of the order and strictly refrained from eating meat. She said that she wanted to study the teachings of the word God, because a priestess's duty is to break curses, to reveal and dispel the shadows buried in people's hearts through words, and to alleviate the fear left by the true Demon King. Although Uhak was not granted the ability to speak, Kunode believed that the word God must have had a special reason for this. However, Uhak had a heart like a human's, and Kunode was confident that the villagers would gradually accept him. One day, Uhak found a young wolf cub in the forest, which reassured the villagers who were worried about wolves. Unexpectedly, Kunode killed the wolf cub. Soon after, thick smoke appeared from a nearby village. Kunode immediately had a bad feeling, recalling similar situations when the real Demon King was alive and the fear that everything was wrong. At that moment, the giant Belka was going mad, still tormented by PTSD from fighting the Demon King, with voices in her head that frightened her. Kunode tried to calm her, saying the real Demon King was no longer present. However, Belka accused her of lying, as she could still hear that voice in her head. Seeing Belka preparing to use word arts again, Kunode reluctantly used word arts to counter her. But their word arts were forcibly nullified because Uhak was standing between them. It seemed that Uhak's presence could isolate all things in the world, making their word arts ineffective. The next moment, Belka was struck back by her own word arts. Uhak, facing the struggling Belka, mimicked Kunode's actions, and killed Belka, then ate her in front of the nearby villagers. At that moment, everyone finally realized that Uhak was not a non-cannibalistic ogress. He had simply never eaten humans before. Following this incident, fear quickly spread, and the order of the village began to crumble. Kunode knew that as long as this fear persisted, the Demon King would continue to awaken in people's hearts. When fear reached its peak, the villagers began to target Uhak. Now, only Kunode believed he was not at fault, because his presence had saved many lives in the village. Even if he had eaten the giant, it was not a mistake. Ogres are naturally man-eating beings since the inception of the world, and he had restrained himself from eating the villagers. Kunode did not want a conflict to arise and sent Uhak to seek help from the church in another village, while she stayed behind to dispel the human fear. However, Uhak did not flee, but instead chose to fight the villagers. During the battle, all word arts around him became ineffective. Seeing this, Kunode fled into the forest. At this point, she was unsure of what was right, but triggered a trap set by the villagers. In the next moment, the surrounding villagers all fell, as Kunode's student Kuze had arrived. Knowing her life was drawing to an end, Kunode wrote down her final thoughts for Uhak. Beasts that do not understand word arts are considered heartless, but perhaps only Uhak could truly empathize with all life equally. Whether it was the small graves he made or the lives he consumed, she had said a priestess must lift curses, but hoped Uhak would discard all the knowledge she had taught him. He only needed to live by his own beliefs, consuming all life equally to survive. If her body could not bear this sin, then Uhak should consume her. At this time, this will was in the hands of General 16 of Ariasia. General 16 was frustrated that his teacher died for an ungrateful village. He was fed up with Ariasia's failure to assist the church, the powerless word god, and the world still fearing the real Demon King. If so, then let it all be destroyed. Thus, General 16 wished for Uhak to become a hero. As a free city established by the self-proclaimed Demon King Sentinel, its military power and population now far exceed all countries outside of Ariasia. However, it is currently under siege by a woman. Meanwhile, Shulk appears in a tavern in the free city. A human mercenary named Mele approaches and offers him a large cigar, but Shulk refuses. Even a skeleton knows smoking is bad for health. He is here to find clues about his identity because he was suddenly revived 2 years ago with no memories of his previous life, and thus he is not very familiar with this world. However, the situation in the free city is not optimistic. Shulk wants to know the number of enemies, only to find out there is just one person, a visitor from another world named Kazuki, who has killed many people over the past month. For Shulk, the problem is simple. He just needs to see who is stronger, him or the opponent. But Mele warns Shulk not to act rashly to avoid disrupting the battle plans. At this moment, the city is rallying troops to protect the main bridge gate, and mercenaries of various races respond. Seeing Shulk wanting to join, Leforgid is curious about how a skeleton that eats nothing can still function. Shulk, in turn, wonders why humans cannot function without eating, and asks if anyone present has seen the bones of a hero. On the other side, the three headed to the free city are about to encounter the Grim Reaper. One of the ogres even managed to dodge bullets from Kazuki 4 times, but unexpectedly, they heard Kazuki singing. The next moment, their carriage was overturned, and 2 of them were killed with a single shot. At this point, Hioto stepped forward and noted that Kazuki looked the same as she did 13 years ago, since visitors from another world do not age. Hioto came to check on the progress, but it was the same as usual. Kazuki commented that the 3 were not very strong, with only Mele being noteworthy. She estimated that the free city would be destroyed within a month. However, Hioto warned Kazuki that continuing to fight alone was dangerous. Even if her client was from Ariasia also views exceptional individual power as a threat. Whether it was Regnigi who died in the New Duchy, Dakai who was also a visitor, or even Vikion who had lived nearly 1,000 years and was killed, Hioto saw that heroes were being deliberately eliminated. The battle in the New Duchy seemed like a rehearsal for the Royal Martial Contest. If Kazuki also wanted to participate in the Royal Contest, it meant she would be in danger too. Hioto wondered why she insisted on fighting alone. Was she seeking the self-proclaimed Demon King Sentinel? Hioto guessed that Kazuki wanted information since Sentinel collected information from all over. Kazuki did not deny this, but she needed an acceptable answer. Recently, All visitors from another world came from the same country, whereas previous visitors came from various cultural backgrounds. Thus, Kazuki speculated that something had changed, leading to an unknown mystery that had transformed the world as it is today. Therefore, she did not intend to ask for help, as her principle has always been to act alone, fulfilling her duties as a hero. Meanwhile, Kazuki launched a full assault on the free city by driving her vehicle and using obstacles to bounce it at a specific angle, eventually getting it stuck on the drawbridge. To her surprise, her bullets did not ricochet as she intended, because Shock intercepted them at a faster speed. To get the answers he sought, Shock agreed to keep up with Kazuki until her ammunition ran out. Seeing all his companions dead, the surviving ogre urged Shock to retreat, warning that a rash challenge could be lethal. As someone who had already died once, Shock had nothing to lose. He wanted to know if Kazuki was the hero, but she denied it. Shock then made a proposal. If he won, he would take her place in the Ariatia Royal contest. Kazuki was indifferent, but Shock wanted her to answer one question before she died. As a member of the search team confirming the Demon King's disappearance, she must have seen the hero. If the hero had died, Shock wondered if the hero's bones looked like him. Whether in the new duchy or in this free city, Shock's pursuit remained consistent: to discover the truth about the Demon King and the hero, and to find out who he really is in this world. 4 years ago, before the true Demon King was defeated by the hero, a major commercial city fell into the hell we see today in just 1 month due to the Demon King's emergence. All survivors affected by the Demon King's power turned into fearful, harm-inflicting zombies, seen by the outside world as the Demon King's army, thus no one dared to come to their rescue. However, today someone has ventured here. A chimera appeared and warned Uhak that moving forward would lead him to the real Demon King, reminding him that he was no match for the Demon King, and that any methods or ideas he had were merely foolish misconceptions. Uhak thought it was just a regular monster, but the chimera introduced itself as Ozonesma, yet Uhak had never seen a chimera like it before. He also mentioned that he had no means of fighting, which surprised Ozonesma. It turned out Uhak was merely a wandering poet, who wished to sing a song for the man before him. Ozonesma was speechless. The other intended to defeat the Demon King with such a method. However, many had tried conventional methods to defeat the Demon King, and nearly all had vanished without a trace. Thus, Uhak wanted to try something unconventional. He aimed to move the real Demon King with his music. After his song, Uhak planned to head back, knowing that not many could capture a member of the Demon King's army alive. Before this, he had only tested his approach on a blind girl. In the final land, following the death of the Demon King, mercenary Reek never expected that the intermediary he was waiting for would be a goblin. However, Rika held no racial prejudices against goblins. He merely found it surprising, as goblins were thought to be extinct by the outside world. Rike's mission was to eliminate all living creatures in Final Land, a task absurdly commissioned by a small village. Due to wild beasts escaping from Final Land, nearby villages had suffered tragedies twice. Even though it was just a small village, the fear within was no different. The goblin knew who Rike's target was. There were rumors in Final Land of a bastard child of the Demon King. If the rumors were true, then the enemy would be of the same race as the Demon King. The goblin wondered if Rike intended to face the bastard child alone. Suddenly, a third voice appeared inside the room, startling the goblin because it belonged to Krafnir, who had developed the 5th type of soul arts beyond word arts. Despite this, the goblin remained skeptical about the existence of the Demon King's bastard child, as no one truly knew their identity. As they were speaking, a pink ooze suddenly appeared ahead. Both were unsure if this creature was their target, as no one had ever clearly seen the enemy's form before. Seeing this, Krafnir immediately controlled a worm to devour the ooze, but the noise alarmed the surrounding natives. At that moment, a girl questioned them about who they were and why they were slaughtering the natives without cause. Reek, thinking she might be the Demon King's bastard child. The girl denied this and introduced herself as Tu, the Magic. 4 years ago, when the Old Kingdom fell, the second princess was about to commit suicide in despair, but was stopped by Tu. Tu reassured the princess that the world wasn't just cruel, and that as long as one is alive, there are infinite possibilities, promising a future that could make the princess smile again. Tu realized that Krafnir's true form wasn't present, and their attacks couldn't harm her. Rike asked Krafnir for a solution, but even the poison Krafnir released, which could disrupt nerves and breathing, seemed ineffective against Tu. Tu urged Rike to stop hiding, warning that she would unleash her full power if forced, which would obliterate them. Despite this, Tu remained unscathed after Krafnir remotely controlled a worm to unleash maximum firepower, turning half the city into ruins. Reek, realizing he couldn't defeat her, tried to reason with her, explaining that the Demon King's army might attack villages and they were fighting for self-defense. Tu, however, pointed out that the locals just wanted someone to rescue them. Although they might hurt others if let out, they didn't deserve to be slaughtered. Since both sides were weak, she chose to help the weaker side, believing that was the true virtue of a hero. At this point, Reek voluntarily laid down his weapons, and it turned out that the natives he had shot were still breathing. They had not come to exterminate everyone. The bounty from just one village wasn't enough to hire them. His other client was the Free City, with a mission to retrieve survivors from the final land. Thus, leaving no living beings meant fulfilling the village's commission. Realizing she had misunderstood, Tu happily tackled him. Reek knew that Krafnir was doing the same. Those swallowed by the worm were still alive. Curious about her next plans, Reek learned that Tu wanted to go to Oriatia and hoped Rike would take her there. Oriatia, known for hosting a royal martial contest and being the largest city-state of humans, was where Tu wanted to go for its bustling atmosphere, and because there was a girl there, she wanted to meet again. Hioto, also a visitor, finally met Sentinel, who claims to be the Demon King. Sentinel knew that Hioto was the one who provided Kazuki with weapons. However, Hioto stated that even without Kazuki's attack, Oriatia would use other means because the Free City had become Oriatia's biggest threat. Given the Free City's current military strength, defeat was certain. The only reinforcements that could prevent this were Hioto's forces. Everything was going according to Hioto's plan. This time, he positioned Sentinel as the seller. He would hire all the mercenaries of the Free City. In the war against Oriatia, Hioto planned to win without using his own troops. He also planned to sway the negotiations in his favor and provide the mercenaries with a necessary battlefield. Unfortunately, Sentinel did not trust Hioto. Moreover, if their deal became public, everything would be ruined unless he could prove himself a trustworthy partner. Confident in his abilities, Hioto took a megaphone and spoke with the mercenaries, introducing himself as a visitor from another world. He expressed admiration for the city's beauty, noting its absence of racial discrimination and how different races fought side by side. However, he pointed out that Oriatia still practiced human supremacy, oppressing other races. Then, Hioto produced muskets, explaining that they were manufactured in a goblin nation that he had developed over 69 years. It turned out that goblins were not extinct, but had become an advanced civilization capable of producing muskets. He argued that this city was a vision of the future. However, with Oriatia's threat approaching, the city's order of coexistence was about to vanish. He did not want to discuss ideals of integrity, but he could guarantee, just as he had saved the expelled goblins, he would save everyone present. Thus, he and the Goblin Legion were allies of the Free City. Realizing something was amiss, Sentinel tried to intervene, but it was too late. Hioto had unilaterally announced that he would establish friendly relations with the Free City. Sentinel finally understood Hiroto's intentions and had no choice but to agree to cooperate. Otherwise, he would be opposing the entire city. Regarding Hiroto's earlier promises, Sentinel only wanted to know his chances of success. Hioto said he would use the Old Kingdom's nationalists as cannon fodder. Then he summoned Zigita, his most trusted advisor, as Hiroto's plan was already in motion. Just a few days before General Gilness of the Old Kingdom was defeated by Roskle, the military strength of the Old Kingdom was still increasing. At that time, Ariatia's 24th General's army was facing off against the Old Kingdom's army led by Kania. Soon after, the 24th General received intelligence that a mercenary troop from the Free City was approaching. Thinking that the mercenaries were going to join forces with the Old Kingdom, he decisively ordered a retreat from their position. On the other hand, Kania also thought the Free City intended to break through the Ariatia army as a greeting gift. Hence, the retreat of the Ariatia army provided them with the perfect opportunity to act. She planned to lead her troops through the forest in pursuit, as the enemy was unaware of their secret routes in the forest. However, as soon as the Old Kingdom's army left the forest, they were scattered by a flood caused by someone sabotaging the canal. In the next moment, goblin gunmen began to continuously shoot at the Old Kingdom's army, and a formidable chimera was lurking threateningly. With the Old Kingdom's army annihilated, Hioto met with the 24th General and openly stated he was there to help him. The 24th General questioned why Hioto intervened in the war without permission. Hioto reminded him that their meeting could be perceived by Ariatia as unauthorized negotiations with the Free City. The 24th General suggested that this was exactly the kind of scheme Hioto would plan. However, the focus wasn't on the facts. Hioto wanted to discuss if there was room for explanation. He knew that Ariasia was divided internally between a faction supporting royal contest reforms and a faction opposing reforms through the hero led by the Queen. Hioto expressed his desire to support the Queen and mentioned that Ariatia's generals were gathering heroes. What if the hero wasn't just one person? What if someone capable of mobilizing an army claimed to have defeated the real Demon King? The 24th General was speechless. The more people who gather in front of the Demon King, the more they will madly slaughter each other. Therefore, the hero could only be one person. Hioto didn't care. If a hero had the backing of a nation, would that nation be considered an enemy to Ariatia? The 24th General also guessed that Hioto's goal was the royal martial contest. Hioto requested the 24th General to provide 2 spots, allowing the goblin Zagita and the chimera Ozonesma to become candidates for the hero. 21 years ago, 7 people were called the original heroes. They were Elena the Benighted White Wind, a divine spear wielder; Ramzo the Star Map, a pioneer in medical technology; Mele the Poisoned Ground, abandoned by the world; Isaac the Chromatic, who claimed himself as the Demon King; Hugo, the Moving Decapitation Blade, an assassin from another world; Neft the Nirvana, a powerful lichen warrior; and Frolic the Heaven, a master archer. These 7 bore the hopes of humanity to defeat the true Demon King. However, when they confronted the Demon King, they were all stunned because they saw a schoolgirl in uniform instead, and none dared to attack first. Isaac initiated an attack, but his tentacle could not advance any further as it neared the Demon King. The group realized that the Demon King had done nothing. It was their own fear that held them back. The Demon King handed a pen to Hugo, who, overwhelmed by fear, began to harm himself. The others also turned on each other. Frolic was killed by Elena, and Ramzo killed Mele. In a blink, the group of 7 was completely annihilated. Today, in the free city of Sentinel, Hioto is the only person who knows that the Demon King is a visitor from another world. All who knew this were silenced by Sentinel, as revealing this secret could turn the world upside down again. Hioto did not hesitate to burn this secret to ashes. Meanwhile, Yuno and Sujiro are camping outdoors. Yuno is curious about the world Sujiro comes from, but Sujiro is also uncertain. He only knows that his original world was destroyed by someone named Shiki. Meanwhile, the generals of Ariasia held an overnight meeting. They knew that Hioto had infiltrated the Ariasia martial arts tournament. Not only had he supported a candidate for hero, but he had also elevated the entire Free City as a hero. General 28 believed they should not intervene, as the Free City was an enemy of Ariasia, and aligning with its queen's faction would hinder the reformists. Although Ariasia would certainly win if a war broke out, they no longer had the financial resources to govern the defeated side. Roskle agreed to allow Hioto to relocate to Ariatia and grant citizenship to the mercenaries, as well as continue appointing Sentinel to govern the Free City. Although it seemed like inviting a wolf into the house, Roskle intended to cut off their power and keep Hioto in Ariasia as a hostage, since the war funds of the Free City came from Hioto. As long as they restrained each other, the final showdown would be at the Royal Martial Arts Tournament. Meanwhile, other candidates for hero began arriving in Ariatia, with Kiazuna and Mestelexil being the first. 2 was introduced to General 7 by Krafnir, and she wanted to know if she could meet Queen Seafight if she won. On the other side, Psionop found Alus, and mentioned that they had met before in the Sand Labyrinth, who was indifferent as he no longer remembered him. Unexpectedly, Psionop brought up Teroa, the demon swordsman who was rumored to have arrived in Ariasia and who was supposed to have been killed by Alus. Alus remained unconcerned, dismissing him as an impostor if he dared not show up. Psionop, however, thought that Teroa might be too strong, and considering the potential harm to innocents if a war broke out. At that moment, Teroa encountered General 22 again, but a group tried to steal his demon sword, believing Teroa to be a fraud. Despite the presence of General 22, the attackers were not deterred. The battle ended with the attackers being completely wiped out. Following this, Teroa changed his mind and inquired if participating in the royal martial arts could grant him Oriatia citizenship. Meanwhile, Kuro was approached again by Lena from Obsidian Eyes, who hoped Kuro would rejoin the organization. However, upon hearing that the leader had died and Lenaris now headed the organization, Kuro had no intention of returning, nor did he plan to side with Oriatia. Lena mentioned an attack on Kuro by Oriatia, but Kuro had never seen the attackers before. He confronted Lena to find out if it was an inside job from the organization, but Lena had no knowledge of it. Thus, Kuro decided to leave, having already injected a serum to free himself from Lenaris' control. Frey regretted not having successfully eliminated Kuro earlier, fearing that if Kuro regained the Heaven's Eye, he could see through every move of the organization. She speculated that Kuro might be coerced into working for Oriatia, and believed that controlling him was possible by finding leverage over him. On another front, Kuze was advised that it was still not too late to quit, revealing that Oriatia's quest for a hero was not about finding one, but about survival to the end. Kuze, however, had no plans to quit and hoped to meet his junior at the Royal Martial Arts Tournament. Soon after, Yuno and Oriatia met the giant Mele and learned that all the exceptionally powerful beings were gathering there, including Sujiru, whom she had brought specifically to kill at the tournament. Suddenly, a tree by the roadside was knocked down by a carriage, and Mele intervened just in time to prevent Yuno from getting hurt. Kia, who was passing by and saw her fruit smashed, offered her own to Yuno, telling her not to worry as she could handle everything. Shock, having obtained Kazuki's spot, planned to leave the free city. Sentinel did not understand why he was not heading to Final Land if he was looking for clues about the hero, questioning if he was too afraid. Spoiler, Shock was likely one of the original heroes who set out to confront the Demon King. This concludes the current anime series, with the third season set to begin the battle for the title of hero.